Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's online session. Today we're going to be talking about biodiversity in the Coral Triangle for Blue Hope live on the ADEX platform. My name is Gekowski, though most people know me as Bertie. I'm an environmental photojournalist and presenter on the From Below dive series, which some of you may have seen. I'm here today to moderate a panel with some very esteemed guests, and we are going to be talking about some of the issues surrounding the Coral Triangle today with our excellent contributors. So what we're going to do, just some ground rules before we start off. If everyone has about 10 minutes to talk about their work. So if we could keep it to that. I know that Nick, you've got a huge host of slides to show us today, so I'm expecting a lot of talk from you. Simon, Christopher, 10 minutes. You heard me correctly, 10 minutes, okay? So let's start off with David McGuire. David McGuire, are you with us?
I am, hi.
Yeah, so David is a marine biologist, a good friend of mine, and founder of Shark Stewards, based out in San Francisco. Shark Stewards work to protect sharks from overfishing and the shark fin trade, and also help to set up MPAs all over the world. So David, over to you if you want to give us all an overview of your work.
Okay, great. Thank you, Bertie. Good to see you again after our Reef webinar last Friday with you and Simon, kind of in prefacing for this Oceans Week and some of the work that we've done together in the Coral Triangle. Great show. I was up till 1:30 last night watching Sir David and Sylvia Earle and other luminaries, and with Blue Hope and Simon kicking this whole week off. And I'm looking forward to taking some action together and probably tuning in with you a little bit later with some films this week. So my name is David McGuire. I'm the director and founder of Shark Stewards. We're a nonprofit based in San Francisco as part of the Earth Island Institute, which is an international foundation that works in conservation and advocacy globally. We focus on sharks, the shark fin trade, and our mission is to restore ocean health, which is an important issue now with COVID, because ocean health is intricately related to human health. And our mission is to restore that by reducing overfishing of sharks, primarily and apex predators in the ocean, reducing the shark fin trade and eliminating it when we can by regulation, and also protecting critical marine habitat through marine protected areas, through national marine sanctuaries and monuments in US waters. And in the past 10 years or so in the Coral Triangle, supporting these ecosystem-based or even local marine managed marine protected areas. I'm an ocean voyager. I'm a diver. I've been diving most of my life. I am a research associate with the California Academy of Sciences, and I study sharks, both here where I live in the San Francisco Bay, but also across the seas, looking at some tropical species, looking at range movements and fisheries overlaps, and then trying to develop regulatory or best fishing practices to maybe separate those two interests of fishing and, in some cases, diving and filmmaking. So I'm a writer and also make films, and I've been with you in the Borneo From Below series. I've worked with Simon, Christopher on some other short films and other media, and we're looking forward to coming back into the Coral Triangle, COVID allowing. I was supposed to be in Indonesia already and Singapore looking at shark fin trade, and also in an area where we have a conservation center on Lombok, but also heading down, we hope, to Timor-Leste. And we have some great news about that. But I want to talk about sharks and diversity of sharks, but we'll talk more about the Coral Triangle because that's where you are and that's where we are more interested, because it is the center of marine biodiversity on the planet. 25% of all species live in this area, with about half the size of Australia. And Borneo is up there to the top left. I'm not sure if that's your top right. And then Timor-Leste down at the bottom. But this is the area of highest fish diversity, high in marine mammals, and also high in elasmobranchs, about 120 sharks and rays, including endemic species that live in very small regions like zebra sharks, wobbegong sharks, hammerheads, of course, which always are a big draw, pelagic species like thresher sharks, manta rays, and more commonly, though, the ground sharks and the flat sharks. So rays are actually in the elasmobranchi. They are cartilaginous fish, and the most speciose in that group of fish. But most sharks that are killed, actually, now that the larger sharks have been fished out, some estimates are 90% of some species because of overfishing in the shark fin trade. Increasingly, we're seeing these small sharks caught up and entrained in fisheries and either eaten, sold as for fertilizer, sold for their fins or their gill rakers for some of the rays, or ground up and then used as fish meal. The biggest threats to sharks before the last 2 decades, really, since World War II, has been overfishing. And typically in these longline fisheries, about 50% of the catch of tuna or swordfish were sharks. Those sharks were let go most often, especially like oceanic white tips, and often could survive. Since the demand for shark fin soup really associated with economic wealth in the past 2 decades, in China primarily, for this demand of shark fin soup, a luxury from the Song dynasty, and it's associated with wealth, prestige, honor, and generosity. Well, none of those attributes apply to the ocean. So many species are threatened with extinction. And unfortunately, many of these fisheries overlap with migratory ranges, in this case, with blue sharks, which we are concerned about, because about 20 million a year are being entrained in the shark fin trade. Around 20 million in Hong Kong alone is estimated. So these fisheries that used to go after tuna are now going after sharks. 80% of all large fish are in a state of collapse or overfishing. 90% of large predatory stocks have declined, as estimated by both the United Nations Food and Agricultural Organization and Dr. Boris Worm. So really, instead of shark attacks on human, it's really attack on sharks. 2014, Nick Dulvey estimated 25% of sharks and rays are threatened with extinction. It's far beyond that because about half are data deficient to estimate their population and the catch on their population. And in many species, we don't even have adequate biology to manage them properly. But what we do know is that sharks are more valuable alive than dead. Through dive tourism with whale sharks, reef sharks, manta rays, white sharks, tiger sharks. These are all 2015 numbers by Cisnero de Mayo, but also was funded by the Pew Foundation. Shark diving industry is over $1 billion globally. It has economic and ecological benefits. We're seeing that sharks and adventure-based tourism estimated in the Coral Triangle can benefit billions of dollars, orders of magnitude more than killing a shark for their fins or killing them for their meat. So particularly, we've been working in Timor-Leste the past year and a half. $2.2 billion is about half their GDP. So if we bring tourists in through sustainable ecotourism, diving, safe diving, and showing them sharks, these fishermen are going to have a livelihood that will continue and benefit for future generations. So this young man got his head underwater in Timor-Leste with us last year for the first time. We taught him how to dive. He's our boat guy. He's our fix-it guy. Now he's going to be a dive master. He's going to make more money than his father ever had a hope to make and more benefit for his family. But we are seeing sharks still fish, particularly in Indonesia, which is the top shark fishery in the Pacific. 110,000 tons, it's estimated. Last year, this is a picture I took in the shark market in Tanjung Luar in Lombok, near where we're taking divers who are spending $3,000 for 2 weeks to come scuba diving. These sharks are selling for about $50. The fins are the first things to sell. And we learned from interviewing these fishermen that these sharks are being caught as far east as Timor-Leste, where there is no condone commercial shark fishery. So big rays are also being caught now. This is a bowmouth guitarfish. They call it the king of shark fin in Hong Kong, $800 a kilogram for a dried fin. So there's a huge demand for this product that is really causing huge decline in these important species. So not only protecting species through regulation, through controlling the shark fin trade, and educating our brothers and sisters in Asia not to eat unsustainable seafood, we need to protect our planet. We have about 6% protected by marine protected areas. There is a goal within 10 years, love 30-30, 30% of global waters by 2030. We have a long way to go. So let's work on it together. Let's not hate. Let's educate. We're working with Chinese. That's Darcy Liu, who's a good friend of Bertie's, professional surfer, advocates for ocean conservation in China. This is a friend of mine, lower left, who's learned how to dive and is now advocating for shark protection. So it's really all about respect. And there are other issues we know from yesterday's program. The global impacts from plastic pollution, as much as 10 million tons a year, and 80% are coming from shore, at least. So we have a long way to go with turning this into either clean fuel or not using it at all. And that will help protect sharks, protect humans, and protect the future of the ocean. So finally, I just wanted to celebrate the ocean, World Oceans Day here, still Coral Triangle Day there, but there is hope for sharks. We're working in blue shark protection. Timor Blue, Simon's group in Timor-Leste, together with the Association of Tourism Management that we were partners in launching in Timor-Leste, just got designated as a hope spot by Dr. Sylvia Earle and Mission Blue. And that is a commitment to protect this incredible area of biodiversity, these beautiful coral reefs, sea turtles and dugongs, and incredible reef systems and jobs. So let's dive in together during this whole week with 8X, with Blue Hope, and let's save sharks and protect ocean health. So I want to thank my partners and sponsors, and I especially want to thank you for having me aboard.
Thank you so much, David. Having been out with David McGuire many times on different film jobs, I can tell you just how hard this guy works in order to save sharks. He's an absolute machine. So if you can, then go out and check out Shark Stewards' work online. Next up, we have Dr. Nick Pilcher. Dr. Pilcher, welcome. How are you doing?
I'm good. Morning,
Good
afternoon, good evening to across the planet.
Good stuff. Let me just give you a quick introduction before you kick off, Dr. P. So Dr. Nick Pilcher has been described as the man who saves turtles. He is a sea turtle expert, a member of the IUCN Turtle Conservation Group, and also founder of the Marine Research Foundation based in Borneo. Dr. Pilcher, please, your 10 minutes is up. If you could just tell us about your work now and your huge slideshow, that would be fantastic.
My 10 minutes is up. Does that mean I'm finished?
Oh no, your 10 minutes is starting now. Excuse me, you've got to, everyone excuse me a little bit. I'm still recovering from pneumonia, so I'm slightly delirious here. So your 10 minutes starts now, Dr. Pilcher.
So morning and afternoon and evening across the planet, people, and welcome to this session. Thanks, Bertie, for the introduction. I find it interesting that sea turtles get lumped in with this big biodiversity thing because there's only 7 species of them on the planet. You know, it's not really diversity in that sense. We're very, very small numbers of people and turtles. There are 7 species of turtle on the planet, of which the Coral Triangle plays home to 5 primarily, and one of them is a visitor. So the flatback, that's primarily based in Australia, occasionally moves up into PNG, but that's really more as a visitor. And the Kemp's Ridley is Gulf of Mexico and Atlantic shores, and we don't see it over here. But the other 5 species are quite common to us. I'd say I don't have slides for everybody, so you're just going to have to put up with looking at me and hearing what I have to say for a few minutes. But the story about sea turtles in the Coral Triangle is really one of, it's a contrast. There's extreme worry, and then there's extreme hope. There's great news stories, and there's horrible stories. And they all come together in the Coral Triangle and make it quite a complicated issue to resolve. Some populations are growing extremely, extremely healthily. The green turtle population in Sabah, where I'm based, is one of the largest and most robust populations in Southeast Asia, alongside that of the Philippines, neighboring islands. While similarly in Malaysia, the leatherback turtle has gone extinct and continues to decline at the other locations where it nests in the Coral Triangle in West Papua, Indonesia, in Papua New Guinea, and the Solomon Islands as well. The populations are small, fragmented in those countries, and barely hanging on. So we do have turtles that are doing well, and that comes on the heels of really, really good and bold management decisions. And that's, I think, key to the story that I wanted to talk about this morning, is that little piecemeal efforts here, there, and everywhere may, over 50 or 80 years, add up to be sufficient to save sea turtles, or for that matter, other populations or other species. But really, I think it's dramatic, bold measures that result in immediate change. And one of those that comes to mind for me is that back in the 60s, the Sabah state government decided to acquire the 3 turtle islands where turtles nested, or the 3 major islands, and bought them over and turned them into a protected area. And the people that were living there moved off and moved onto the mainland. But those 3 islands today are the backbone of green sea turtles in all of Southeast Asia. And had the government not stepped in and made such a dramatic and bold move, then things would have looked very, very different. And I draw another example with Malaysia, and that is the case of Sarawak, our neighboring state just to the southwest, where they had, back in the 50s, a harvest of over 2 to 3 million turtle eggs per year. And the population just continued to decline and decline and decline and decline without anybody doing much about it until about the early 80s, when somebody went, ooh, I think we might have a problem. But by then, protecting the islands and allowing some level of egg collection for the local population, none of it really made a big difference. Had they stepped in right at the very beginning and said, these islands are protected, these populations will be protected, there will be no egg harvest, that population today would also be part of that backbone of sea turtles in the Coral Triangle. It's unfortunate that there aren't more of these bold decisions. If we look at the green turtle population, we have massive contrasts. We have populations, for instance, in Pangumbahan in Indonesia, where the population has collapsed and gone right to the near zeros, from a population that used to be in the thousands and thousands just 20, 30 years ago. And so you've got this massive decline in some populations, and then you've got steady and growing increases in Malaysia, which balance them. So this creates a little bit of a problem numerically when we want to look at population status. Is the population overall growing, or do we focus on individual beaches? So at these big sort of IUCN levels, we look at populations, regional management structures, and that sort of thing. But at the individual country level, you can see that we have these declines that are dramatic. We continue to have collection of eggs. We continue to have collection of sea turtles, and there is continued illegal trade of sea turtles up to other countries outside of the Coral Triangle, up north of us. And one of the worrying problems with that is, in the past, we used to get vessels come into the Coral Triangle with fishing nets, and they would come down with the sole purpose of catching sea turtles and taking them back home. And today, many of these boats that get apprehended don't even have fishing nets on board. And what that means is that the trade has changed. These fishermen are not coming down to fish for turtles, but rather local villagers in the Coral Triangle are collecting them and stockpiling them. And there are illegal phone numbers that one can call. And all of a sudden, a vessel from outside of the region will sail over the horizon at night to pick up this stockpile of sea turtles. It used to be in the past that they would come down and do the fishing. But today, our own local villagers are keeping these turtles and stockpiling them for this illegal trade. Of course, there's money involved. And I wouldn't say that these local villagers are particularly going out specifically looking to catch sea turtles, but rather if they end up pulling up their net and there's a turtle in it, well, hey, that's value, and I could sell that. That's one of the things that needs to be addressed, this illegal trade in sea turtles. There are some other issues as well that I think are worth pointing out. One, obviously, this issue of local villagers stockpiling turtles, and it's not only in Malaysia, it happens in other countries as well. We have emerging issues surrounding tourism. People feeding sea turtles, people keeping them in play or attracting them to areas where they can take tourists to go swimming with them. And the trouble with this is that it's uncontrolled, that the turtles then become habituated to boat sounds and boat noises, and we end up with strandings and boat strikes and damage to turtles through this increased tourism around sea turtles. Another one of those areas that probably needs to be looked into. I think possibly one of the biggest challenges is that at a management level, at a decision-making level, there is not sufficient use of the ecological knowledge of sea turtles to make decisions and to make management or to design management interventions. I'll give you one example. We know that sea turtles come out onto a beach to lay eggs and go back and spend the majority of their lives in the water. It stands to reason that the majority of threats to sea turtles are going to be while they're in the water. And bycatch in fisheries is a major problem. People have asked me many times, what is the #1 threat to sea turtles? And I would say bycatch in fisheries, bycatch in fisheries, bycatch in fisheries, and bycatch in fisheries. Yep, that's the other one. And this is what happens. You get these people that go out to fish and they have absolutely no intention of catching sea turtles, but that's what happens. They end up with turtles in the net. And we aren't doing enough to address that issue. Malaysia has started to address this. For shrimp trawling, let me give you one example. Shrimp trawling, which is possibly one of the biggest impacts on sea turtles. It's coastal, where turtles spend the majority of their time, and turtles and shrimp just happen to coincide in the same habitats. In Malaysia, the Department of Fisheries has taken the bold step of making turtle excluder devices a legal requirement for the time being in 4 of the states, and we're hoping eventually that will be across the entire country. But that step right there just requiring trawl boats to use turtle excluder devices is saving hundreds of turtles per year. If we could get that implemented across other places where turtles and fisheries interact, if we could start addressing fisheries in bycatch, sorry, in gill nets, bycatch in the long lines, and other fisheries that are out there, that is how we would end up saving turtles. I would say that across the board in the Coral Triangle, we know what the problems are. We know the threats of bycatch, we know the threats of direct take, we know the threats of egg harvest. We just haven't really taken enough bold decisions to make a big difference. And I think that that's where I'd like to end, and just calling for governments in the region to make these massive, bold decisions and implement rules and regulations that will lead to immediate change and not small, gradual change over ecological timeframes that we won't see. Thanks.
Dr. Pilcher, thank you very much. Really interesting to get your insights about an animal that's been around for 100 million years, that even survived the dinosaurs, but now, due to the activities of mankind, every species is threatened with extinction. So we'll touch upon this a little bit more later on in this chat. Be very interesting as well, Dr. Pilcher, to get your insights about coronavirus. I'm sorry, we're not going to be able to escape that subject and how that might impact upon sea turtle populations, but we'll come on to that later. Next up, we have Dr. Christina Shaw. Dr. Shaw, she is a Dugong plus Seagrass conservation specialist, and she's also CEO of the Vanuatu Environmental Science Society. Dr. Shaw, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me on the panel. Dr. Nick said that he felt like a little bit of a fraud because he only had 6 species to talk about with the turtles. Well, I've only got 1, and technically I'm not even sitting in the Coral Triangle. So I feel like even more of a fraud than Nick, but so sorry about that, and bear with me, guys. So I'm here to talk about the dugongs, and I do have a couple of slides. So I think if I can get this working, I'm not sure if you can see my dugong there, but there we go. So I ran a small conservation organisation in Vanuatu, and we've been working here for about 5 years on dugong and seagrass conservation. So the dugongs can be found throughout the Indian and Pacific basins, but globally they are declining, or so we think. They're not the easiest species to study, as they spend a lot of their time underwater and often in deep and murky waters. So they're a little bit cryptic. But they have been, the studies that have been done have shown that generally over the world they're declining, which is why they're listed as vulnerable on the IUCN Red List. I'm going to get you some more pictures. So in Vanuatu, we do see dugongs every now and again. This picture on the right of the screen there is a picture up in one of the islands, outer islands, where there is about 23 dugongs in that one picture. But most of the time we see them in 2s or 3s around the islands. We have a very narrow fringing reef in Vanuatu, and also very patchy seagrass. So we don't get these big, wide expanses of seagrass like you do up in Australia or in the Middle East. So we don't have lots and lots of high numbers of dugongs. We don't even know exactly how many we have, but we are trying to assess that with our studies. But throughout the Coral Triangle, you will find the dugongs as well. The biggest threats to dugongs is, again, bycatch in fisheries. Certainly here, the most common story where you hear about a dugong being killed was when it got caught in the fishing nets and the gill net fishes. So it's not necessarily the commercial fisheries, but it's also that local artesian fisheries. And again, most of the time, they're not intentionally trying to catch a dugong, certainly here in Vanuatu. I think in some of the other islands, there is still intentional take. So in Papua New Guinea and potentially in the Solomon Islands as well, there's some intentional take. But the majority of the mortalities are from incidental bycatch. So people aren't meaning to catch one, but they happen to find it in their nets. And then if it's still alive, then quite often they will kill it and eat it. But often it's already drowned by the time they've gone back to their nets. So we are trying to educate, trying to suggest that people don't leave their nets at night, because that's one of the biggest factors, that you leave the nets unattended. So always be with the nets. A lot of the fishermen don't actually like the dugongs being close to their nets, because obviously it damages their nets as well and their fishing gear. So they don't really want to catch a dugong in their net because it will break it as well as hurt the dugongs. So that's one of the biggest threats. Also, the dugongs are obviously dependent on seagrass. So really, if we want to look after the dugongs, we have to look after the seagrass. And seagrass is really important for many species, not just dugongs, green turtles, seahorses, commercial species like bêche de mer or sea cucumbers, and also some finfish species that either use it as habitats when they're adults, but more often when they're juvenile. So, and seagrasses are again in decline around the world. And the threats to them, there is physical destruction with destructive fishing techniques, dredging, anchors, propellers. They will all damage the seagrass beds. But the water quality is probably their biggest problem. Obviously, they're plants that are growing underwater and need light to create energy. And if the light is impeded, then they won't grow as well. So they will be in decline. So anything that affects water quality and increases turbidity, like more runoff, increased nutrients in the water, then the seagrasses are going to suffer, and that will mean that the species that depend on them will also suffer. The other thing that we are seeing more and more of, unfortunately, is very large storm events. So here in Vanuatu, we had tropical cyclone Harold that went through this year as a Category 5 and tore through some of those islands. 5 years ago, we had tropical cyclone Pam that also was a huge storm that caused a lot of destruction. So we have seen seagrass beds, or certainly communities tell us that there used to be seagrass there before the storm, and then it's not there after the storm. So these the climate change making storms more severe, if that's what they're going to do, if that's what the predictions are, then we are probably going to potentially lose more seagrass, which is a double whammy, because seagrass is so good at mitigating climate change, and it's a very good carbon sink. So not only is it in the plants themselves, which is capturing the carbon or the excess carbon dioxide from the water and from the air, but they sequester the carbon down into the sediments. And because there's very little oxygen in the sediments, the detritus tends not to rot so quickly. So those carbons is kept down in that sediment. So they are really a very, very good carbon sink. So it's really important, not just for dugongs, not just for green turtles, not just for the seahorses, and not just for those important fish, to make sure that we look after our seagrass beds. And that's what we've been doing in Vanuatu. We've started monitoring our seagrass beds using the seagrass watch methodologies, and starting up a long-term monitoring place where we've got 4 different sites where we are teaching the local scientists how to monitor their seagrass beds, getting the communities to participate, making them understand about seagrass, making them interested in seagrass, looking at the different species that they have in their seagrass beds, and sort of generally trying to increase awareness, both at that local level and at a government level as well, to make sure people understand the importance of the seagrass. And I think it's interesting what Nick was saying earlier about the government should be stepping in, making these big, bold decisions. Well, through the Pacific, it's very, very hard for those governments to do that because of the land tenure that we have in the Pacific. So all land is custom owned here. The government does not own the land. So although there are national laws and there are laws to protect dugongs and to protect turtles, making protected areas in the traditional sense here is not as easy as it is. And the vast majority of the land that's owned by communities is very small packets of land. So it takes a lot of collaboration and effort to try and join up these little tiny packets of land to get everyone to protect them, so that overall there's good protection. There are advantages because obviously the local people are very engaged in their local areas, and if you can win them over, then they're super enthusiastic and really engaged. But it is very hard on a larger scale here to get everything protected. So I think probably that's where I'll leave it for now, and back over to you guys.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shaw. Also some quite sobering information there, but great to hear the work that you're doing out in Vanuatu. And as you mentioned, although it's not technically part of the Coral Triangle, many of the issues that you're facing over there are also faced throughout the Coral Triangle in terms of the dugong populations. I was actually just lucky enough to swim with the resident dugongs in Timor-Leste, which is a wonderful experience. And for anyone who's watching this, if you haven't had a chance to get in the water with a dugong, do whatever you can to make it happen, because it truly is one of those experiences that you will remember forever. Absolutely amazing animals. So next up, we have Julian Hyde, who is head of Reef Check Malaysia. And Reef Check Malaysia, just reading directly from your website here, Julian, work towards sustainable management of coral reefs in Malaysia. That is just a very brief overview, but I will let Julian talk in more detail about the work that they do out in Malaysia.
Thank you. We're getting even worse on the species count because I'm not going to talk about any numbers of species at all. I'm going to talk about 0 species. A couple of things that the 2 of the speakers just said, Nick and Christina. Nick was talking about how much local knowledge some of the communities he works with have. Christina was saying that you can get people engaged if, you know, in the right area in their own way, but I'm going to come at this from a different direction. We're talking about biodiversity. So I have my one, let me share my one slide because it's the only one I've got. So I'm going to show it to you. There you go. That is a picture of the Coral Triangle. One of the previous presenters showed it already, but there it all is. I picked this one because it's got a slightly different view of what we normally see of the Coral Triangle. It's a little bit wider. Let me come back to that in a second. We could talk all day about the importance of biodiversity in this region, more widely, whether or not we want to include it in whether or not we want to include areas like Vanuatu, for example. I can give you a list of statistics, which David did earlier on, about the biodiversity in the region. We've got 30% of the world's reefs. We've got 60% of the world's, 70% of the world's coral species. 30% of all coral fish species are found in the Coral Triangle. It's home to 6 of the world's turtle species. Nick says 5. I'll defer to his expertise. But that's just a list of, that's just data. It doesn't tell us why it's important. It's like, to the ordinary man on the street, so what? And you want to talk about getting communities involved, then they need to understand why. I don't know if they do. They're the user of the biodiversity, whether they're a diver, a traditional fisherman in one of our islands, whether they're from somebody traveling from Europe to see the beauties of nature in Asia. If they don't understand it, it's the old question of how can we expect them to look after it if they're not putting a value on it, if they're not understanding what it's for. And I personally am not convinced that we've succeeded in communicating the importance of biodiversity to the man on the street. So David talks about shark finning and how that's decimating shark populations. So what if I live in London in the UK and I go on an annual diving trip? How much does that bother me? And if I'm not even a diver, does it bother me at all? Nick's talking about turtle egg harvesting. How much does this resonate with people? And how are we going to get them on side with the arguments to protect biodiversity? I read about biodiversity. It's always academic papers telling me it's important, but never why. So I go back to Paul Ehrlich's response back in the 80s. Species are to ecosystems what rivets are to an aeroplane. You lose one, it might not be a disaster, but each loss adds to the likelihood of a serious problem. So if we start to lose the diversity, the variety of life, if we start to lose species, then the ecosystems fall apart. And of course, we rely on ecosystems. The ecosystem services, you've got the basic provisioning services, they provide food. Maybe that's something that people can understand. Then there's climate regulation, absorption of CO2, generation of oxygen. Technical, boring, not necessarily going to get through to people. And I know I'm talking to a scientific audience here. You may understand biodiversity and all of the implications, but I'm wondering if the people we're trying to get through to understand. I was listening to one of the webinars as part of World Oceans Day yesterday, and it was a webinar about the diving industry and how much diving should be involved in marine conservation. From my own experience, the diving industry is actually not that involved in marine conservation. It's becoming more involved, it's becoming more engaged, but certainly when I ran a dive center 10 years ago, it wasn't really engaged. And if you can't get divers, the very people who are going to go and see these things, want to go and see these things, if you can't get them engaged, who can you get engaged? There's not a chance we'll get the average man on the street who's never been snorkeling, who's never been diving, to understand what these marine ecosystems can do to them. I'm really questioning that. So how do we communicate to the man on the street? Instead of the list of data that I gave earlier on, we look at the Coral Triangle. It's got a population of 400 million people in a fairly small area. What do all those people do for a living? How is nature affecting their lives? How do their lives affect nature? How does that affect me if I'm going on holiday to the region? It's an important economic resource. Data on the value of the thing varies. I've got a figure of $3 billion in foreign exchange every year for fisheries, for example, or I've got a figure taken from a source saying that coastal tourism revenues are worth $3 billion per annum in the Coral Triangle. I think David showed some statistics earlier on that showed the values are much higher than that. So we don't even know how much it's worth. But we can use that sort of information perhaps to engage with the average man on the street. And instead of talking about the scientific part of biodiversity, talk about the broader aspects of biodiversity where people can see a value for human society. This biodiversity, these ecosystems, we call them what they are. It's a coral reef. Coral reefs have got fish. Fish we eat. So no coral reefs means no food. Make some more simpler connections between the complications of biodiversity. Nick's talking about turtle extrusion devices to save turtles from the prawn fishing. That's great. And yes, it's been extremely successful. But if you want to engage the man on the street, perhaps that's a slightly esoteric argument. So is there another way to do it? David talked about the value of shark fishery. Absolutely. But how much is it engaging the traditional Chinese community in Malaysia that's still eating Chinese shark skin soup at weddings? So are we getting the messaging right to protect this thing that we all understand, biodiversity, or do we need to reconsider what we're doing when we try to talk about biodiversity, explain what biodiversity is and use it in reasons to conserve biodiversity? That's me and my one slide.
Fantastic. Thank you, Julian. And now finally, let's head to Simon Christopher. Simon, who is the founder of Blue Hope and Timor Blue, and also the founder of Scuba Zoo. Simon, nice shirt, mate. Is there a story behind that?
there's the story indeed. Of course there is. Thanks, Bertie. Great to be here. I'll just clarify, I'm certainly not the founder of Blue Hope. It's just another story. But Blue Hope is a movement of a few very experienced, passionate people, and the movement to bring the blue world into people's lives and make it relevant. So I've been living in Southeast Asia for 25 years. I'm a marine biologist, marine zoologist actually, and I headed out to the Coral Triangle in search of the best diving, and it was as simple as that. And I very quickly arrived in Sabah, having dived around Indonesia and the Philippines, because I heard about this fabled island called Siparan, Pulau Siparan. And I heard that Jacques Cousteau had found it, discovered a new untouched piece of art. And so I thought, I've got to go there. So I went there and I fell in love with it. And I did about 2 or 3 months living on the island. And then I headed off to Australia and got into underwater filming, and I fell in love with underwater filming and very quickly said, right, I'm going to come back to Siparan, set up Scuba Zoo. So I ran Scuba Zoo for 23 years, and that is essentially all about bringing the underwater world into people's lives and trying to put it in the context of people's lives. And what Julian's been just saying is really important, is trying to make biodiversity relevant to people. So Scuba Zoo, we did about a couple hundred hours of TV for BBC and National Geographic and Discovery, or David Attenborough over to Sabah quite a few times. And it's really all about connectivity and relevance, making it relevant. Biodiversity is lovely, but why is it relevant? What is the story? What's the story behind it? And so it's all about trying to connect with the viewer, because everyone's so busy trying to survive and feed the kids and send the kids to school, and it's very hard to make it relevant. So you've got to kind of make it personal. You've got to personalize the story. And I think one of the things that's happened with COVID recently is it's made it personal. So we've had this nature shock, which has been caused by a number of things, but it's really, when you drill down, it's a lack of respect for nature and the biodiversity that we've been taking out of the wild. And so now, of course, the world is together. There's a unity there because it's survival. This is affecting this. Hundreds of thousands of people are dying, and so it's a big issue. So one of the ways that we manage to entertain people and bring biodiversity into people's lives is using presenters, as you know, Bertie. But one of the big names, obviously, Sir David is the all-time great. He sort of created the natural history genre. And the natural history unit in the BBC was really just started from him sort of 60 odd years ago. But the likes of Steve Irwin, belated Steve, who unfortunately passed away doing what he loved with crocodiles. Steve Irwin started Animal Planet by virtue of his love of crocodiles. But as you know, one of the ways we did this is we brought you in, Bertie, to do some stories. I met Bertie Aaron in London and said, look, you've got to come over to Borneo and help us tell these stories. So what we wanted to do is to try and bring the biodiversity into people's lives and make it relevant. So with that said, I think what I'd like to do is play a video, one of the videos. So Bertie has been very passionate for the last sort of 7, 8, 10 years, bringing biodiversity and showcasing the importance of biodiversity with his various stories. So I'd quite like to show one of your show reels, if that's okay, Bertie. Do you mind? Is that okay? Your permission? Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
We can play the first video, please, and you'll get an idea of how we bring biodiversity into people's lives in a fun way.
My name is Bertie.
We're now deep in the heart of Tabin Wildlife Reserve. Kota Kinabalu is often billed as one of the only capitals in the world where you can get from the airport to scuba diving in less than an hour. So that's my challenge today. Let's see how quickly I can do it.
So this orangutan is going to wake up soon, a little bit dozy and with a new tattoo. I know a few friends who have done that.
Nice. So I'm covered in buffalo poo, but on the plus side, I look like a bush. Watch this. This is my new best friend, Hero.
Totally awesome! I've got it! The Turtle Whisperer!
Give me your other hand. Or a foot, that's okay too.
Tail out!
So, it's time to set him on his merry way. Off goes up and into this ancient rainforest. On top of a building in Dhaka. This is definitely a first for me. Sticking my finger up a... What you want me to do is take a selfie in front of a load of sharks, right? Yeah, I thought so. All I can see are sharks all over around me and in my face. No, and that's one on my leg. No, a couple more. Hello, hello. Fuck off. This northern river terrapin is one of only 25 individuals left on Earth, which makes it not just one of the world's rarest turtles, but in fact, one of the world's rarest animals. And he's beautiful. It's been a pleasure.
David McGuire, there you are. Okay, and the video has finished on Facebook, so back over to you, Simon.
Okay, thank you. So that's a bit of fun. So what we've tried to do, obviously, with all of our programming is to try and make it relevant, put in the context of people's lives. And just to kind of visualize what Julian was saying about biodiversity being like an aeroplane or flight, we take that a little bit further. If you imagine, I mean, I fly to Kuala Lumpur from Kota Kinabalu once a week, twice a week. That flight on an aeroplane takes about 2.5 hours. And let's say that aeroplane is held up by 1 million rivets. So there are 1 million rivets that hold that plane together. Now, what's happening is because of our actions, we're losing biodiversity at a rate of, we don't know, but it's 10, 20, 50, 100, it's too much. So essentially, if you talk about life on the planet, biodiversity, and you put in the context of the flight, the flight of that flight from KK to Kuala Lumpur, and if every hour or every minute we're losing, say, 10,000 rivets, then as the plane gets halfway, the wings are going to start juddering and the plane's going to start falling apart. And it will get to one rivet, which will be the final rivet that downs that plane, that destroys the life on that plane and everyone on it. And if that rivet is a nitrogen fixing bacteria in the Southern Ocean or in the Coral Triangle, which produces more oxygen than comes from land, from trees, then you have a huge problem. And that is essentially why it's so important, biodiversity, because it's the net result. It's the genetic biodiversity of all the interaction of those animals together. So every time you lose a species, you're reducing that ability to create life. And the air, biodiversity is life. It's the very air we breathe and the water we drink. So if you want to speak to someone in a position like a CEO of a company or a minister, you say quite simply, do you want to breathe? Do you like breathing? Because every time you do something which has an impact on biodiversity, you are chomping away. We're basically cutting away a little bit. Every time we lose a species, we're reducing the amount of the ability for us to actually create oxygen. And so that's so. But having said that, there's a lot of people who wake up in the morning, they've got 7 or 8 mouths to feed, they don't have a fridge to go to, and they can't put food on the table. So there's that real inequality. And the Coral Triangle, those 400 million people, a lot of them, a large, way too many people, fall into that category of people who cannot put food on the table. Even more so now because of COVID. So we're having it's a reality check, and that's what we need to try and address. We need to try and readdress the way we live, the way we need to live more sustainably. We need to stop taking wildlife from the jungles and from the sea. We need to manage our resources, and we need to act more sustainably, whether it be with regard to plastics, how we live our lives, and that's the big issue. So it's all about value. We need to reassess value, and the Coral Triangle has more biodiversity. It has more options. It's the most biodiverse, and it's the most important piece of real estate on the planet because it has that biodiversity. So that's really what Blue Hope is all about. It's bringing that reality into people's lives and trying to find a mechanism in which we can appreciate and celebrate the Coral Triangle, but at the same time start making it a bit of an equalizer and bringing the new way we live in terms of sustainability into people's lives, so people can actually eat. And until you do that, until the people in the Coral Triangle who cannot eat, I'm afraid there's that disparity, and that's the big problem, and that's what we've got to address. And until we address that, we're not taking it seriously. So it boils down to creating circular livelihoods, inclusivity, not exclusivity, and equality, and everyone needs to be able to put food on the table and send their children to school. And until we do that, I'm afraid you're going to have a problem, because biodiversity is going to suffer. And that's really it. So 2020 and Blue Hope is a very exciting time, because hopefully we can capture everyone's imaginations and talk about the future and talk about the next 10 years, which is UNESCO's Decade for the Oceans, and try and really start to appreciate the value and the importance of the ocean and nature, and how we live our lives amongst that biodiversity. That's all from me for now. Over to you, Bertie.
Thank you, Simon. You did say that you'd also tell us the story of your shirt.
Ah, yes. Okay. So how can I forget? So this shirt, this is the official shirt. So it's a very colorful shirt, and biodiversity equals color. So all the shapes and sizes and colors of all the species in the Coral Triangle, there's more biodiversity, there's more species, there's more colors, shapes, sizes, tastes, smells. And it's not just wildlife or creatures in the ocean, it's human biodiversity. There's the cultures, there's so many different cultures. So this shirt was from the World Ocean event in Manado in 2009. It was the official shirt of the signing of the Coral Triangle Initiative, when the 6 presidents were prime ministers of the 6 countries: Malaysia, Indonesia, Philippines, Timor-Leste, Solomon Islands, and Papua New Guinea. And so it's very dear to my heart. I've slightly outgrown it. I've been eating too much whilst I've been in lockdown, and so I've outgrown it. But that is a very topical shirt, but it represents biodiversity. So there you go. That's the story of the shirt.
Good stuff. Thank you so much, Simon. We have about 20 minutes left. So that includes 10 minutes of questions from the audience. But just before we do that, and something that I mentioned earlier, and many apologies for anyone who wanted to escape the subject of coronavirus, and a couple of the panelists did touch upon it during their talks. But we'd like to know, what impact do you think that coronavirus is going to have on the Coral Triangle? And if you could talk about your specialist area, that would be fantastic. Let's start with Dr. Pilcher.
Thanks. Yes, definitely difficult and interesting times to deal with, and for communities to deal with this. I think that in the bigger cities, the bigger centers, sea turtles are not going to be impacted. But I think at the local community level, when people don't have the opportunity to go out and earn a regular income the way they would have done before, there might be a greater dependence on resources that get taken from the sea. And so it could be that sea turtle take goes up, probably not a full-time issue, but certainly something that could be there. Another thing that is happening across a number of places, with countries being in lockdowns for multiple months, is that many of the beach patrol programs that used to exist have been put on hold. And that means that egg poaching along a number of beaches has basically skyrocketed. I know that that's happened here. I know it's happened in a few other places. With the lack of enforcement and with a lack of regular patrols by conservation teams, then you have the opportunity for poachers to get in and take eggs. Then also there are other things. There are a number of conservation programs, for instance, that rely on having paid volunteers or interns that come in and assist with the programs. And now with the lack of international travel, the lack of the ability to move around, those things have also come to a grinding halt. So a number of small NGOs across the region are going to be feeling the pinch, both financially and logistically, because they don't have the workforce and they don't have their funding income that typically would drive those organizations. We at the Marine Research Foundation, we've been a little bit lucky in that we have a major sponsor that funded us prior to the beginning of the pandemic. This is the Sime Darby Foundation, and they've continued to fund us through it, which has allowed us to have our staff continue to do their work from home. But we are probably one of the exceptions to the rule rather than the norm. And so this lack of ability to move around and the lack of ability to get out and protect sea turtles where the sea turtles exist has caused a number of problems. And I can see that will continue for quite a while to go.
But Dr. Pilcher, what about some of the success stories that have been in the media? It'd be good to get your input on that, because there have been stories emerging from India and from Thailand of turtles turning up in huge numbers on beaches, I think particularly leatherbacks in Thailand. So do you think that actually it goes both ways?
Look, I've got to look at this. I'm quite skeptical about a number of these things. The hundreds of thousands of turtles that emerge in India happens annually, and it just gets reported as being a side benefit of the COVID-19 pandemic, and they're completely unrelated. There are some places where turtles will emerge on a beach if that beach happens to be nice and dark and unpopulated, and that happens up and down places, even if it's not the pandemic time. It's just that now these get reported as being a side benefit of the pandemic, and I'm not convinced. I think that it's the occasional little rare thing. The other one that I see on Instagram and Facebook and whatever regularly is hundreds of sea turtles on a beach, and then you see that it's a clutch of 100 baby hatchlings, which is the typical number in a clutch of eggs, meaning there was one female turtle that laid eggs on a beach, and then, yeah, sure, 2 months later, 100 little baby hatchlings went to the sea. So I wouldn't say that there are these great positive stories that are coming out of it. I think that those bits of news probably happen regularly and continuously and just get buried amongst the regular bad news that prevails across the planet.
Bertie, can I pick up on that?
Yes,
I think you're right, Nick. I think the turtle breeding cycle is so long that it takes more than 3 months for lots and lots more turtles to appear. So we're not seeing increased populations of turtles, but what people are saying to us is that they see them more often because there's no boats around, there's no tourists around, they're not being disturbed. So maybe they are, their normal patterns of behavior are becoming a bit more commonplace. I don't know. But people are also talking about increased numbers of fishes. Fishes don't breed that fast either. So what is, from my perspective, I'd be interested to know what is the impact on populations and movements of populations from having no tourists around for 6 months. And it's not just the 3 months of the lockdown. In Peninsular Malaysia on the East Coast, the season finished in about October last year. So there's been no tourists since October. And when it came to February, March time, the season never started. So there have been no tourists in those areas for what, 6, 7, 8 months. And if tourism doesn't recover by the end of this year, and it probably won't in mass tourism terms, it'll be towards the end of this year. That's a whole 12 months that these places have been closed down. So what is happening in those ecosystems? Are the corals regenerating? Are the populations coming back, or are they just filling holes where the tourists used to be? I think that's something that will be very interesting to study. I'd really love to get some data on that. But to support what Nick said earlier on, we're hearing reports of increasing turtle egg poaching on some islands. We're hearing locals fishing in the marine parks. So the impact of COVID is like, yeah, we're seeing more fish come along, but people who no longer have tourism as a livelihood are having to rely back on the ecosystems that surround them, and that, they're going back to fishing basically. Not much we can do. We can't let them starve.
Yeah, I think ultimately 6 months to a year is not enough of a breather to allow the oceans to recover, and it could be that, particularly when you're going to have so many people who are now living in poverty, that as soon as a lot of the lockdowns and the restrictions are lifted, that actually what it's going to do is it's going to increase fishing. You're going to have a lot of desperate people who like you say, need to make a living.
Maybe one of the lessons is that we need some places that we close down permanently or for longer periods of time. That's why I'm actually saying we need to study it.
Yeah, absolutely. And Dr. Shaw, would you be able to speak about what potential impact you think that coronavirus could have on dugongs?
Well, yes, I guess it's the same issues in that there's less tourists around. Obviously, we don't even have COVID cases here, but the tourists are basically stopped. So is there going to be a difference on in the disturbance of dugongs? The other thing that we didn't notice here as well, I spoke to some of the guys that run fishing shops here, and we had a stimulus package where people could take some money out of their superannuation accounts, basically because of the cyclone and of COVID. So there was a little bit of stimulus package, and the sales of fishing gear went up quite considerably. We don't have a lot of fishing gear shops, but just a couple. So that was one of the things that was noticed, like people, if there are those stimulus packages, what are they spending their money on? And here some of people were spending it on buying fishing gear. So potentially, yes, there is, tourism here contributes at least half of the GDP, and a lot of the foreign foreign currency coming from overseas. So when people don't have those livelihoods, what are people going to do? And a lot will go back to subsistence livelihoods. Lots of gardens and planting gardens, but also a lot more fishing. And we have an increasing population here. The population rate is going up quite a bit. So I think that continuous pressure, also with the economic hit that's going to happen as well, will put more pressure on our reefs, including dugongs. If they happen to catch a dugong, I think there'll be less incentive to let it go if it's still alive. The same with turtles as well. If they don't have as much money in the communities. But maybe it won't happen. Maybe if we can recover quicker, maybe if people can grow things in their gardens and get a little bit of that stimulus, or there's a lot of labour movement as well. So if Australia and New Zealand can open up to the Pacific and allow people to go and earn money in Australia and New Zealand, if they remain low COVID numbers and we're allowed to be in this travel bubble, then maybe we won't get so much of an impact. We don't know.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Shaw. Let's see if we have any, we have 10 minutes left. Let's see if we have any questions from the audience. Nora, are there any questions? If there aren't, then we'll head to Simon for his input.
We don't have any questions at the moment, Aaron.
Okay.
But I'll pop in if there's one coming up real soon.
Okay, well, don't worry, because this is a very interesting subject that we're touching on now. And Simon, it would be good to get your take next.
How about, can we just talk about COVID and sharks? I'd like to hear what David thinks about COVID. Is David still with us?
Yeah, thanks. Well, a lot of it's anecdotal. I can say that we tried to promote science ecotourism, and we had a plan to bring some North American divers down who are quite keen on coming to Timor-Leste, since I've been kind of singing the praises, but also our conservation center in Indonesia. And since we can't, that's definitely hurt the local operators. And talking to them, these people are really suffering from income, and anecdotally, they're seeing more fishing in some of these protected areas, or at least, yeah, in them. So there is a real concern because of just desperation, I suppose. There's less money, less tourism, less jobs, less money for local people. We actually brought a little bit of money in to our lab in Lombok just to keep the lights on, basically, or keep the locals employed, so that they're out there watching this protected. There is a marine protected area out in front. And of course, it doesn't really take very much, fortunately, to keep them there for a few months. But elsewhere, we're definitely, I've been talking to operators who work in Cocos Island, which is a big hammerhead sharks hotspot, and other large pelagics. The Revillagigedos off of Mexico, again, it's a marine protected area that is primarily supported by tourism and also watchdog. And it appears that we know that there's less eyes and ears out there, but some of the reports are that there are more encroachments in these areas, because that's where all the big fish are also. So it is a big concern, not only for local economies, but also some of the, we've had the benefits from these long-term ecosystem based managed. We're talking about biodiversity. So you don't just protect sharks, you don't protect turtles, you need to protect their entire habitat and the entire trophic level, which in some cases includes humans as well. And it is a concern if this travel restrictions continue, we're going to see more encroachment, particularly on some of the large pelagics.
Okay. Thank you, David. And then finally, I think we've just got time for Simon.
Yeah, thanks. So, I mean, I think from my perspective, it comes back to nature. We need to bring nature into people's lives. Nature doesn't need us. We need nature, and so we've got a short amount of time, because the reality is that man's got to eat, and it's harder than ever now because people have lost their jobs. So we really have to connect. We have to synchronize a new relationship with our biodiversity, with nature. So the regions in the Coral Triangle, in the words of Dr. Silver Earle, the hope spots, her mission to try and make the whole blue planet one big hope spot. Really, Blue Hope is about trying to champion all the blue hope spots within the Coral Triangle, or the Coral Triangle itself, and make it a hope spot where we can cherish and champion biodiversity, whether it be turtles, whether it be dugongs, whether it be sharks. Each one of those species have an incredibly important role to play, and we need to reconnect with nature. So the places in Coral Triangle that have that biodiversity are really lucky compared with the other places that don't have biodiversity. So we need to really work out how we can protect that. So we need to create more studies. We need to work out what exactly is left, how we're going to protect it. But most importantly of all, we need to find out a way for the communities living within that biodiversity to benefit from keeping that biodiversity alive rather than dead, as food on the table. And that's the big problem, because man's got to eat. And so we've really got to fast track that. And that's really it, is we've got to readdress our relationship with nature. And COVID, I think, has given us that realization. And so we need to move forward. And so what we need to do, COVID has essentially reset the balance, has allowed us to make a reality check and say, hang on a minute, we've got a chance to it's a big nature shock, and it's terrible, and it's creating huge suffering, medieval suffering for so many people. But hopefully we'll bounce back and reconnect with nature and find a more harmonious way to reconnect with nature that means that we can live more sustainably. And plastic is a big story, because plastic it unifies us. Everyone uses plastic. You drop a bit of plastic in the river or in the ocean, or throw it out the window, and it will end up everywhere. So I think this whole movement, this plastic is a good way to join everyone together, because we've got this opportunity now to clean up the planet, and this biodiversity is really the faces of plastic, and the communities are the faces of plastic. So Blue Hope is about trying to distill that and to try and bring that story into people's lives throughout the next over the next few weeks, months, and essentially. But that's what COVID's about. I think it's given us that chance to readdress things, and hopefully we come out, resynchronize, and get a new type of normal back that is more sustainable.
Thank you so much, Simon. Some huge issues here for us to touch upon, and an hour and 20 minutes doesn't even come close to us doing it justice. But hopefully everyone who's been watching along has enjoyed this chat and has learned as much as I have. I want to thank all of the panelists. Thank you to Blue Hope, and thank you to ADEX for hosting it. And yeah, thank you guys. Very insightful chat. And anyone else who wants to watch along, this video will now be on Facebook.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Bertie.
Okay.
Thanks, Bertie. Bye all.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.